Today we're thinking about opening and closing doors. Now, this is a subject very close to the hearts of my two dogs. They want to know how to do it. Well, one of them does anyway. My Yorkshire, Lenny, when he's in the kitchen, he wants to be in the garden. When he's in the garden, he wants to be in the kitchen. He's learned a technique when he's in the garden. He just flings himself, two paws, at the kitchen door and it opens. But he's not learned to close the door. So he's very much like many Christians. They don't know how to close the door. Now, of course, we're not thinking about physical doors today. We're thinking about spiritual doors. But let's have a look first at the idea of opening and closing a physical door, and then we can get some idea as how to open and close spiritual doors. As a physics teacher for many years, I used to teach my students about a certain famous English scientist called Sir Isaac Newton. In 1687, Isaac Newton published his 3 laws of motion, and these laws describe the relationship between the movement of an object, like the door, and the forces acting on it. So if you see a little child approaching a door and he's trying to open it, he's using force, but he's not using them correctly and he can't open the door. So a force is defined as something which causes a stationary object to move, and in our present discussion we're thinking about spiritual doors moving. Now I've made you aware that in the physical world these kind of problems exist. They also exist in the spiritual world, and it will be wise that the average person learns what forces to use to open and close spiritual doors. You say, well, close the doors. How do you do that? What are you talking about? Well, we're going to look at it in more detail today. Doors are not that obvious to go through. In places where there's security, it will say on the French doors, it will say poussez or tirez. If you use the wrong force, you're not going to get very far. So what are these spiritual forces? The first one, which I'm going to consider today, is called the fear of the Lord. That is a spiritual force. In Proverbs 9 and verse 10 and 11, Solomon wrote, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and by it your days should be multiplied and the years of your life should be increased." Good to know. A similar verse in Proverbs 1 verse 7, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." Try and teach a fool so he doesn't want to know. Okay, stay in your ignorance, but you'll be destroyed by it. There are many people with a lot of intelligence, more intelligent than me, but they have very little wisdom. Intelligence is measured by IQ. Wisdom is known by the fact that you live a long life, you live a healthy life, and you're prosperous. A fool cannot be told what to do, and he despises God's authority, and he despises God's delegated authority, as we've been looking at. Now Solomon, he's a good example to follow, because he built the temple. He was known as the wisdom of King Solomon. And foreign dignitaries like the Queen of Sheba came to look at what he'd got in his temple. You know, he's a very famous king, Jewish king. But he made many mistakes because he was in pursuit of happiness. And he thought that the secret of happiness was having a new woman in his bed every night. And so he defiantly loved, because he was told by the Lord not to do this, he defiantly loved many foreign women. Now, a foreign woman brings not only herself, but her gods as well. She'll have foreign gods. And so when he loved many foreign women, he had 700 wives, 300 concubines, and they turned away his heart from the true God. 1 Kings 11 and verse 3. He built high places for Chemosh and Moloch, abominable idols on the Mount of Olives. Now, the Mount of Olives is a very sacred place, and he turned it into a place where there's groves of olives dedicated to these idols. And he did this, why? To please his wives. So his wives turned his heart away from the true God. How sad. Many men and women today have lost their love for God because of their spouse. They love their spouse more than they love God, and so their hearts are turned away and they go after the things that their spouse wants. Many people have been pulled away into witchcraft because of this. At the end of his life, Solomon built a temple, and he built a fleet of ships in Tarshish, which is Spain. Then he realized at the end of his life he had come full circle, and he wrote in Ecclesiastes, what is the conclusion of the whole matter? Now, if you don't know the book of Ecclesiastes, it's after Psalms, after Proverbs, and before Song of Solomon. And there's 12 chapters. And in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, he says this in verse 13. Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13. What is the conclusion of all this? We've got all these women, all these ships, all these buildings that I've made. What is the conclusion of it all? He says, reverently fear and worship God, who is the foundation of all happiness, which is the foundation of all happiness and the duty of every man. So he'd gone full circle. He realized he tried to get satisfaction in buildings, in women, in ships. Come full circle. He says that the foundation of all happiness is to love God by fearing him. Now, his foreign wives, and through idolatry of their gods, he had opened a huge door of dissatisfaction into his life. Now, we don't have Solomon's wealth, but we need to learn the same lesson that he learned. For our own protection and to fulfill our destiny, we need to develop and learn how to use this first force, the fear of the Lord, recognizing God for who he is, having a continual awareness of him, having a deep reverence for him, and a sincere commitment to obey him. Now, all that's in the notes. I suggest you make a little paragraph there, put it somewhere on your wardrobe, read it regularly. Recognize God for who he is, be continually aware of him, have a deep reverence for him, and a sincere commitment to obey him. And then you got the first force in action.